Hello, 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 hello. Happy Thursday. If you are here and able to join us live, it has been a while since we've done a broadcast of Live Well Sister, and I am super excited to be back and talking to wonderful women who can help us figure out ways to live better lives and be thrive and be healthy and all of these wonderful things. So for those of you all who don't know me, I am Marcie Thomas. I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective, which also includes the BGC Book Club and Live Well Sister, which I figure now is a good time to bring it back because we're about to transition into a new year. And as people, we're always looking at ways to do things differently or better when we make those types of transitions. So I want to welcome you here. If you're watching us live, please feel free to drop your name or drop, where you're joining us from in the comments. If you're watching replay, please let us know that it's a replay and share and like and all of those wonderful things so that people can get in on this conversation. Just real briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with Live Well Sister, it is a place where we will be talking to Black women who are well-versed in spiritual matters and self-care and our personal relationships with others, as well as money, finance, careers, living well, being of service to others. So that's pretty much what Live Well Sister is about. Us being able to learn and grow and glean and hear things from other sisters who are thriving and surviving in those areas. So tonight's very special guest, and as you can see here, I have a lot of tabs in here because this was a really good book that we'll be talking about. We have with us this evening Chloe Dulce Louvouezo, a Congolese-American writer, mother, and advocate for women whose work is driven by discourse on identity and healing. As a storyteller, she supports creativity and belonging of underrepresented women and seeks to deepen understanding about and within communities. Chloe is the executive producer and host of the Life I Swear podcast and author of Life I Swear, Intimate Stories from Black Women on Identity, Healing, and Self-Trust, which came out just a week ago. And with this book, she explores the nuances and insights around mental wellness told through the lens of women from the Black diaspora. In addition to this, she also serves as Senior Communications Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on its Public Engagement and Insights team. She also sits on the Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser's Commission for Women. And she is a founding board member of Huru, which creates sacred spaces for rest experience. We all need rest that foster emotional well-being and wholeness. She is a graduate of Howard University with a BA in journalism and also public relations and corporate communications from Georgetown University. So she is very well versed in the things we'll be talking about this evening. And with all these other things going on, she also is a mother to a son. So needless to say, Chloe is a very, very busy woman, and it is our pleasure to have her with us here tonight. So let's welcome to the stage, Chloe Louvouezo. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Marcie. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, yes, it's indeed a pleasure to have you here. When I, had a chance to hear from your team and we talked about having you come on, I said, oh, this is perfect to have her come back now, to come back as we're bringing back Live Well Sister, because I just think that it's a great platform and the things you talk about in this book are right in line with what we believe in. So congratulations again.
Thank you so much. It has been a journey, but a fairly fast one, though. I was just talking earlier today that it was just a year and a half ago that I submitted the proposal for this book.
Oh, wow.
So to see it in my hands, it just, it's very surreal.
Wow. So you actually, So basically during the pandemic.
Yes, very much during the pandemic. I mean, 2 years ago to the day, I hadn't started writing.
Wow.
And so it it was January 2020, before the pandemic started, that I committed to the book and committed to writing my stories first. Just if I'm going to ask other women to be, transparent and vulnerable with their own stories, I was like, let me write my own first. And, between January and March, I wrote, and March of 2020, I started pitching, and Harper was like, yes, we want you.
All right. Well, that's wonderful. And it is indeed a beautiful book. Of course, you can see all my bookmarks as I was telling
Oh,
Chloe
wow.
that I really enjoyed reading it. And there are beautiful pictures actually, I turned right to you. But there are beautiful pictures of women. Tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, how you came up with the concept of Life, I Swear, just the concept overall. And
Yeah.
then a little bit about your feelings about the power of story.
Yeah, for sure. Life, I swear, is like one of those things that, me and my girlfriends, or I would say to myself, just like, life, man, like, I swear. And it kind of captures, that like that sigh, and that sigh can mean a lot of things at different moments in our lives or to different people. For some people, or at different times, it's meant like, man, I'm so exhausted, or I'm so restless, or I am looking back at the past in either awe or regret. And I'm also in this moment in time knowing that the future is so ambiguous, and sometimes it's in excitement, sometimes it's in fear of the future, but it captures like that, like relief, that sigh, that exhale that we have with ourselves. It's a moment of reflection for me. And so I couldn't, it was a no-brainer once I started to have, I call them like these Life, I Swear kind of conversations, and they're conversations around all the things in life that have informed who we are, but also brought us to this moment, all the things in life that inspire us. And I just did it. That is the Life, I Swear, is the only way I know how to capture that in one saying, right? As it relates to storytelling, I think that as we are telling our own stories, and there are 26 women, myself included, who tell our own stories. As we tell our own stories, it's important to have that moment of, how do I feel right now? Like of assessing where is my heart? And when people say, how are you doing? I usually say, how's your heart? How's your heart? You know? And I think when we ask ourselves, and when we're honest with ourselves about how our heart is, often we just default to, I'm okay, I'm good.
That's
But
true.
how are you really doing, sis? Um, when we're able to be very honest and articulate and express how we're really doing, and we are able to tell our story from that really authentic place, then to me, it makes storytelling a tool for healing, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so that's kind of, it was really hard to there. The book is about so many things, which is, it's easy to, tab a bunch of things because
Right.
it's about so many things. It's not about
Right.
just one thing. But I think
Absolutely.
that's a reflection of life. We're not, we can't boil our existence down to just one theme or topic or thing we're grappling with. Usually we're trying to navigate multiple lanes at the same time.
Absolutely. And, with all of these tabs, as I was saying, as you mentioned, it's yourself and a total of 26
Mhm.
women writing, and it's a series of essays that are broken down into different areas. And we'll get into that a little bit in a minute. But the reason why I have so many tabs, there was not one essay
Mhm.
that I could not find something powerful in.
Yeah.
Even if that person's story wasn't identical to mine, there was a thread, or there was
Right.
something in there that as a Black woman I could say, oh, I can relate to that, or
Mhm.
I've experienced that. And I
Mhm.
think that that's just very powerful, that it that it is that type of book that you can
Yeah.
find yourself or see yourself, or it calls you pause, cause you to think about something that you may have experienced in your own life. So
Hmm.
that I think that's very powerful that you were able to do that, within the confines of all different stories. And there are some themes, throughout.
Yeah, there
So
are. Yeah,
right.
that was kind of by design. I wanted, and I always have to flip the book to actually look at all the women
Hmm.
because it was by design. I think that, yeah, I wanted I mean the takeaway that you got where you're able to relate to all of the women in some way, I was too. And that's how I selected the women, really. I wanted to identify women who kind of represent the spectrum of, even within Blackness, the umbrella of Blackness, geographies or culture, origin, sometimes, language. Not all of them are English speaking. The way they approach healing is different. And so I wanted us to be diverse, but also have enough overlapping where you can see your own story reflected in the story of another woman. But in the differences, you can be open enough to shifting your perspective or to learning from another woman. Right. And so I think
Absolutely.
it's important to recognize, where we have this universal lived experience as Black women, but also recognize how nuanced and diverse we are in our own ways. So I'm glad that that was the takeaway.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was. Now, for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet or aren't aware of Life I Swear, if you don't mind just sharing a little piece, just so people can get a little idea of what the book is about or what they can hope to find when they
Yeah.
pick it up and buy their own copy, buy it right away. Read
Yes,
it.
sure. I grappled with what to read because every story, and I have my own stories that are woven into these stories. Every story is so different. But I think I'm going to just to give readers a sense of the gist and the intention of the book. I'm going to read two things, if you don't mind.
Oh, no problem.
Um, the first is on page 17, and it's kind of a dedication to Black women. And then I'm going to read an excerpt from the introductory letter that I write to Black women.
All
Um,
right. I'm gonna come down. So if you look and you don't see me, it's just I
yes,
want people to look at you while you read.
no worries. So this book is for women who know women and for women who love women. For women whose identities have been questioned or whose heartaches have cut through their sense of self over time. This is for Black women whose voices have been silenced to the point of disassociation. And for those who kept their stories to themselves, waiting on pride or fear to pass. It's also for women who believe that healing is our birthright and that joy cannot be stolen. For women who trust the liberation and learning that comes from sharing and listening. Our stories are ours and they are sacred. This book is for us. So now I'm going to read on page 10 an excerpt from the introductory letter of the book. I love stories. I love the texture and the nuances of them. I love understanding our whys of everything. Why do we feel the way we feel, and what makes us do the things we do? For Black women, being in community as we unpack and make sense of our whys and our lives is an outlet that nothing else in the world can provide. Our sharing of uncertainties, vulnerabilities, and trepidations about life makes space for a special intimacy. An intimacy we are rarely afforded because the world expects the strength of Black women to be demonstrated through restraint of our true selves. Challenging seasons of life remind us how much intimacy and feeling understood are a gateway to personal healing. After a trying year in 2019, I started to document conversations with other Black women about personal stories that have enlightened us to answer some of these questions, as deep dive dialogues in my Life I Swear podcasts and as stories in this book. I've always considered myself a cat with 9 lives, rebirthed in each new season, one that emerges from fires at times scarred, but layered in stories that together tell the tale of the dance of this life. It's been an incredible one. I've lived in 11 cities, 5 countries, and traveled the world. I've been in abusive and loving relationships, home birthed the prince of a son, grew a family, been a single mother, raised by a single mother. I've taken risks, led a spontaneous life, explored artistry, and ebbed and flowed through loss and glory. Tell me something you've been through, and I bet I can relate. Give me a story of promise and hope and faith, and you're speaking to my spirit. Give me a story of pain and struggle, and know in my eyes that I deeply understand. I spent years trying to find the words to articulate the breadth of what this journey of life has meant to me. Putting pen to paper through stories of love and loss, discovery and rebounds, is the only way I know how. The pages that follow are an anthology of stories from Black women about the falling down, the cycles, the post-traumatic growth, and the resilience. In curating these stories, I've had the blessed opportunity to speak to other women of the Black diaspora from around the country and the world, all who have shared from a place of vulnerability and truth. Their stories capture a range of experiences and reflections that offer nuance and variation of our human nature to discover new facets of ourselves. They represent voices and sentiments of our time, chronicled for our collective healing.
Thank you. Thank you. And that really is what this book is all about. Now, one of the
Mhm.
things that I found so fascinating, and you mentioned it in that excerpt that you read, is that you have had what many would consider to be a nomadic life.
Mhm. That's how I describe it.
So, tell us a little bit, just a little bit about that, because I really I know that that informs a lot of who you are and how you came to find your own identity as a citizen of the world.
Mm, yeah, nomadic life is how I describe it as well. It was very transient. Um, I grew up raised by a single mother, and she was a career woman. But in that, she went wherever the work was. And so, we lived in DC for a little bit. When I was younger, we lived in Jersey, we lived in LA. But when she job searched, she didn't job search just in her geography because sometimes
Mm.
jobs were hard to find. So she went where the work took her. And that meant that, when she got a new opportunity, we would up and move. And I think the biggest blessing of my life is the opportunity to move to Niger, where even before I was born, she had spent 10 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. And Niger became the love of her life. And it is in sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa. And I moved there when I was 7 and until I was about 15.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful experience. Um, it was a complicated one as well, because, I was a young Black girl. My mother is white, living in Africa.
Wow.
And I'm also half Congolese. I think you mentioned that in the intro,
Yes.
but, you know, I've just, you know, in terms of identity, sat at this place of a position of being, what does being Black with a white mother in Africa feel like? What does being
Mm.
Black with a white mother in the United States feel like? Um, what is it like to be my family's from Central Africa living in West Africa? What does where do privilege and race overlap when you're in a developing country? And all of those things were things I had to navigate from a very early age. I think it instilled a certain wisdom, as a 7-year-old, just being very aware of, economic disparities and, just how to navigate race, um, what it meant when I walked down the street with my fellow African, friends versus when I walked on the street with my white mother and what that said about me. I have one essay in here that talks about, the one of the first times I went to a market with my white mother. My mom, she's lived in Niger for 30-ish years.
Okay.
But still, that doesn't mean that as comfortable as she was in Niger, there was still some natives to Niger that were uncomfortable with her presence. And so,
Right.
there's one story in here about the first time where I went to, it wasn't the first time I went to a market, but the first time when I went to a market, and it was the first time that a little child had seen a white person before. And that's how her mom described it. And this was in a remote village, it wasn't in the city, but feeling those, like, everyone's eyes on me. Um, and many Nigerians are my same complexion. I could pass for Nigerian if I weren't with my mother.
Right.
And so I think, in that moment, describing what it was like for Nigerians to question my affinity to my mother as much as my affinity to them.
Right.
And just being hyper aware of that, layered with the fact that, it was a Muslim country as well. And so navigating not just race and not just culture, but also the culture that is attached to religion as well. As a young girl in a predominantly Muslim country. And all of those things, I think I came out of those experiences, not to mention the experiences of, I lived with several different families as well, because my mother's work often took her to remote villages and towns. And so because schooling was in the city in Niamey, I lived with 3-4 families
Oh, wow.
in Niger. And then for high school, I came to Seattle and lived with 2 other families while in high school, while my mom was across the world.
Wow.
While I was a little bit estranged from my father and both sides of my family. And so just kind of living in these different environments, it was a gift and a curse, because on one hand, I've always been, discovering and seeking and like asking questions of the world in a way that is a beautiful curiosity, but also in a way that is like forever yearning for belonging in some sense. And I find myself in my adulthood, in my womanhood, in my motherhood season, really centering everything on my body. Where do I feel the safest, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and leaning into that. And, the existential question of like, where do I belong and to whom I belong, that I used to ask myself when I was a young child, to me, that is answered when my body feels completely at ease among Black women. And so, I that question of like, where is home and with whom is home, is a question I think a lot of us ask as we're, in these coming of age years, like, and we often attach home to, people and places, and really home is within ourselves, which I hope is one of the biggest takeaways of the book. But also home is in community. And so just like rooting myself in community has been just critical to to this journey.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that I could relate to in your story. Now, I didn't move quite as much as you did at that stage of my life, but I did, I have lived in a lot of different places as well. I went to 3 different high schools.
Mhm, mhm.
And, and then I was in the Air Force for a while, so I'm
Mhm.
celebrating Veterans Day
Good
today.
job.
But I've been in a lot of places and lived in different places, and even since my time of getting out of the service, I've lived. Right now, I'm living outside of Atlanta, but I've lived in
Mm,
Detroit. Where my dad was. He passed away a few years ago,
mm.
but he was in Detroit. I was there. My mother is in Southern Georgia. I was there for
Yeah.
a while, and I as well have struggled with that.
Mm.
What's home? Because I know
Yeah,
what's home to. I know what used to be home. I know where I grew up.
exactly.
I had all these other places that I lived. I know where my dad was. I know where my mom is. But is that really home for me?
Right.
So now I'm in that process of really finding home. Being in a new city a little less than a year, and being in a place. Excuse me, that has all of the things that I love culturally and things like that. So,
Yeah,
okay, I think this is it. I think this is home. But I had
yeah,
to find that, for myself and within
for
myself,
sure.
and then, position myself to, find that community and all of those
Mhm.
things. So I could really relate to that in your story, as well as, some of the other ladies that had similar, situations
Yeah.
where they were trying to, just ground themselves somewhere.
Yeah, I was in conversations with someone recently. The word grounding came up. She said she was drowning in her pain, and she literally, thinking about water and grounding, literally had to come out of it and ground herself.
Hmm.
Um, that metaphor of drowning in terms of like feeling overwhelmed that you can't
Hmm.
grasp anything that feels tangible, and it's really like rooting and grounding yourself. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things you already have mentioned, about living in different places around the world, and just discovering who you are through that process, and like people of mixed heritage, whatever the mixture is,
Mm-hmm.
just having to determine who they are, and like seeing this one side of life and yet another side of life, and that could show up in a lot of different ways as well. Not just in our physical beings, but sometimes it could be economics or other
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. And I really, that feels like a very much like an echo. Elaine Welter, she has an essay in here called In Between, or Between Worlds. And that in between is not, it's not specific to race. It is
Right.
very, a lot of us are in between, and that can mean so many things for so many people. But it's really when you feel that, and I think of this for myself, when you're like, I identify with um with multiple aspects of who I am or where I'm from. And I feel at home everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. It's
Mm,
feeling like an outlier,
right.
essentially. And for everybody, that means and can look like something different. And it's not always tied to race. It can be tied to, um, the vernacular we use,
Right.
or when people are like, those are my people, or that's my tribe.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
It can before you find your people or your tribe or the people who speak your love language, it's this wandering until you do,
Hmm.
you know.
Absolutely. Wandering and really, getting to the root of who you are. And that, for me is a central theme throughout the different parts of the book, is that every woman, no matter where she is or
Mhm.
what's going on, she's really trying to find her way, a home in terms of where she might
Mhm.
decide to rest, but also that home within herself, and being able to be a faceted,
Mhm.
multidimensional being, with things that might be positive and things that might not be so positive.
Yes.
So I think that was something that I really get out of the book as well.
Yeah, I love the idea of multifaceted multifaceted, multidimensional, and hopefully I think this book and the essays, it's not to my credit, it's to the contributors' credit, they just do such a good job of just describing how textured we are, as individuals. We are complicated. We have lots of emotions. And when we give ourselves permission to hold space for those emotions, it's not as linear, our growth is not as linear. Our identity is not as linear. Success is not as linear as society might put pressure on us to make it look like. When we're really honest, it can feel messy. It can feel convoluted. It can feel confusing, but I like that there is space. And I think beyond this book, we're just all allowing space to be complicated. And that is allowing ourselves to be human. We're human.
Right. Absolutely.
I think it really, the embracing that really challenges the idea that we have to be strong. And what does strong even mean? Because behind the layers, we're actually soft. We're actually fragile. We're actually very tender. And I think the essays in the book do a good job of, showing that fragility of life, all of the emotions that accompany fragility of life or fragility of faith. It does a good job of presenting that, but then also presenting, our the gusto, I think, of our spirit,
Right.
for a lack of a better way to explain it.
Absolutely.
But we can have that duality at the same time and be multifaceted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just being able, what I also love is just the thought of us being able to find those safe spaces where we can have the opportunity to be vulnerable. Because I know at one point in the book, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was something to the fact that, we go through these things and sometimes we are spending so much time trying to wear the superwoman cape. I'm a super employee, I'm a super boss, I'm a super mom, I'm a super wife, I'm a super daughter, all of these different things, and not always being vulnerable enough or having safe spaces where we can feel vulnerable enough to say, well, hey, I'm not so super all the time.
Right.
I'm struggling here, or I need help here, or or I'm sad here, or whatever is going on. So I think that this book speaks to that in the stories as well.
Yeah, you touched on something that I've getting better at, but the I need help part. I think is very real for a lot of women. And me, I've been a single mother in my life, and just I've got it. I'm gonna defy the expectations of me. I don't need help. I can do it on my own. And I do think that there is a beauty in the perseverance of that, but also when we invite, vulnerability into our relationships, it allows us to ask for help. And what a relief that can be.
Absolutely.
when we get past the pride or the fear that holds us back from, being in need of help is like inviting someone else into our space. It's an invitation to see me not as, quote unquote strong. It's an invitation for them to see us when we're a little bit more fragile and vulnerable. And I think that intimacy is so important, particularly among Black women, among each other, because we know that when I'm by myself, I'm human. And when you're by yourself, you're human. But for some reason, we put on the capes when we're intersecting. And so I do hope that the more we're comfortable leaning into vulnerability, it also invites intimacy in our connections as well.
Absolutely. And of
Yeah.
course, we're talking about these things, and we know that we have to do our due diligence and be careful and all that thing. Everybody isn't ready.
Right, right.
Everybody can't handle whatever it is that we're dealing with. And, there is, to be vulnerable, but safe spaces, that's
For
the key.
sure. For
Because
sure.
there are spaces that aren't as safe as others in order
For
for
sure.
us to do that. But I just think it really is important for us to, do that, because I think of all of the wonderful women, and this is just kind of like Brown Girl Collective for years. It's been about sharing stories of these wonderful, spectacular historical women or modern day women who are accomplishing
Yeah.
all these things, just badass Black women doing all these awesome things. And it's so great. And I love to see it. And I will continue to do that. But at the root of it is sometimes, that's just one piece.
Right.
There's
Yes.
all these other layers to what's going on. And there might be that person who has the great job and making all the money and the nice car and all of this, but she could still be dealing with some issues in another place.
And
Several
sometimes
other places.
some other places. I mean, and I do think that, and I've been a casualty to, climbing the ladder and getting the accolades and all of those things. And sometimes that is a cover up to what we actually need to be working on, because that's something we can control. That's something that feels more accessible because we don't have to actually do the hard work of personal examination, and introspection can be harder work than, working hard on an external level. So yeah, I mean, we have to take success and the definition of it with a grain of salt. I believe.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one of the things, of course, in this book, there are women who are writing their stories through your podcast. They come on
Mm.
and tell their stories and things like that. And sometimes it really isn't meant to be for public consumption. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
just that thing that you do for yourself, you
Yes. Yes.
know?
Yes. And I've often said, I think storytelling is a tool for healing, but that does not mean the story needs to be told out loud. Storytelling to me is, what is the narrative that you are writing of yourself? How are you looking at your past, how are you assessing yourself? How is your relationship with yourself? How are you nurturing yourself? What are the words that you're using to that either are speaking power or extracting power from you? It's really about how you are coming to peace with your own story, how you are the practices that you're using to, like, for me it's binge journaling, which just so happens to be writing, but really it's about the narrative that we're using for ourselves. And I think the narrative that we are currently using informs our behavior,
Right.
because we're speaking life in some way into ourselves, and that's either going to help or hinder. And so it's about being very, cautious about the words that we're using when we are speaking about and to ourselves, and doing that in a way that is responsible, doing that in a way that is nurturing ourselves. And if you choose to also take the next step and share them out loud, to each his own, I think we are totally entitled, to guard that sacred, those sacred reflections amongst ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. And forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I believe that in one of your stories, you talk about a family member who passed away and like their stories went with them. Am I speaking out of turn?
Hmm. That probably wasn't me. I did talk about grief.
Okay.
I
Okay.
talked about grief lens of from the lens of losing a child.
Okay.
I think there is a story, and the one I think that you're referring to is, she is just like a friend of my heart, but her name is Didine Umunyana. And if this
Okay.
isn't one you've already read, it's one that I suggest you do read. But she talks about, Didine is from Rwanda, from Kigali, Rwanda. And I spent some time in Kigali, about 6 months. The way I met Didine was not there. It was actually, I used to go to the market, and I used to go to the market and, buy all these different fabrics and go to a tailor and get all these different outfits made. And the one like fabric stall that I would always go back to was a woman who sold all these fabrics. It was Didine's mother.
Oh,
And
okay.
Didine's little sister was always hanging out and doing her homework in the fabric stall in the market. When I came back to the States, Didine lives in LA, and she's an advocate around she's an advocate, and she's also a amazing speaker, and she speaks around generational trauma from the genocide that happened, I believe, 25 years ago in Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about how a lot, and it's an interesting experience being in Rwanda, because there is the older generation that remembers the genocide, that her mother in particular, her parents were murdered, her all of her siblings were murdered, and she was the only one in her immediate family that was left.
Wow.
And then you have a younger generation who don't have the memories, even if they might have lived through it at very infant years, or they might have been born immediately after, but they don't hold that memory. And so it's just so jarring to see two generations that have completely different experiences in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the older generation who are so traumatized, and so many of them are still deeply struggling with all of the losses they've endured, to the point where they don't know how to articulate it and pass those stories down to the younger generation. And so the disconnect that can happen, I think, is, Rwanda is a very immediate, it's recent history.
Right, it is.
But we, as Black people in the world, we have centuries of stories of both triumph and trauma, and many have not been passed down. And so, what that does for us, and I can attest to this even with my white mother, but what that does is we're absorbing stories and often behaviors that are rooted in trauma that we don't even understand ourselves, right? We don't understand why we have visceral reactions to certain things, and that's often because our parents did, but we don't understand why we are, some of our own behaviors and choices and preferences in the way we're living in life. And I just, I admire Didine's story, because she's all about, generational healing. But that's also something that, as a mother, I dedicate this book to my son. He's a boy, but my stories are his stories.
Absolutely.
And my story is also just not mine. It's not just for me. It's for, community to share and to evolve from them together.
Absolutely. And this just makes me think of something. My mom says I always talk about her, but it's okay because nobody knows who she is. She's
Right.
normally. But she and I were just having a conversation yesterday, just talking about, just our knowledge and our awareness of different things, and how there may have been things that, transpired in her life that were based upon, the way that she was raised. And then, depending on what she learned may have impacted what she taught me. But then, what I was saying to her was that, basically everybody works with what they have at that time.
Right.
And so it's just a matter of understanding that, not necessarily holding people responsible or blaming them or whatever the case may be
Yeah.
for whatever information that they didn't have at the time. But, for each one grows and comes along,
Mhm.
hopefully we can always do better. And
For sure.
even though there might be certain things that are, generational trauma, or, some people call them
Mhm.
curses, whatever the case may be, that just because that might have been what it was, and it still may inform us in a certain
Right.
way, it doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be the whole story. That's just a piece of
Right.
the story. And we
Yes,
can we can
absolutely.
we can rewrite the ending. We can do
Yes.
things
Yes.
differently.
I love that. I wholeheartedly agree.
So we're getting close to time. We have
Mhm.
about another 15 minutes left, and I appreciate you being here. I just want a couple things. Now you do talk about some other things in the book. Talk about bearing witness, which is
Mhm.
basically in that portion of the book, people are telling some of their stories of like unhealed wounds or
Mhm.
traumatic things that have happened to them and how they are working through that process.
Mhm. Yeah, so I kind of organized the book into three parts, and bear witness is the second part. The first is sum of my parts, like
Mm-hmm.
SUM. I am the sum.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of
Right.
talked through that earlier. It's really I am multifaceted. I
Right.
am made of, all of my memories, all the places I've been, the people I've loved, kind of inform who I am. And the second is bear witness, which is it's around, there's two parts: still I rise and the current of adieu, which is goodbye in French. Um, and so still I rise is really about it. Didin's essay is embedded in that one, but
Mm-hmm.
it is around the wounds that we still have. And
Mm-hmm.
despite the things that would the world would otherwise assume would break
Mm-hmm.
us, we're still here and we're still standing and we still choose ourselves.
Right.
And then the second part of that is really about grief, and from different lenses, and I shared my story is around the kind of the grief of this. My story, particularly unhealed wounds, is goodbye to an old version of myself, essentially. And the
Yes.
choice, and someone mentioned, the idea of when did you start saying no?
Mm.
Because when did you start saying no? And so it's the feeling very definitive in where your boundaries are. Some
Mm-hmm.
of the other essays in there are around grief, grief of a brother, a mother, um, a father, and what the lack of that individual, um, how that shifts, how the person having to say goodbye
Mm-hmm.
sees themselves, and I think there are some powerful essays in that. And then the last part of the book is called Piece It Together, PEACE. It's
Yes.
really about, after the things that we've gone through, the progression of how I hope that we do start to tell our stories is from a place of self-trust, from a
Yes.
place of knowing with certainty what our value is,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we're starting to assign language to our intuitive understanding of who we are.
Yes.
Yeah, and part of those essays are around motherhood as well, and just reimagining and reinventing ourselves, and giving ourselves permission to take on kind of new versions of ourselves, new seasons. So.
Absolutely. And something that kept ringing out to me when I was reading the part about motherhood. Now, I don't have any children. However, I have plenty of friends that do, but a couple nights ago, for those of you who watch Insecure,
Mhm.
there was a big thing about a couple of the characters on there, Lawrence and what's her name, Condola. They had a baby, and it was just showing what was going on with them. They're not together, but
Mhm. Mhm.
they are trying to co-parent
Yeah.
and things like that, and just watching some of the things that Condola was going through as a new mom, and that resonated with as I was reading that part of the
Mhm.
book. So I'm like, wow, the concept of a fourth trimester,
Yeah.
and
That's real.
the things that many times women will go through during that period, and making the adjustment and all of that. So I thought that was just really powerful to read your story and those of the
Mm.
other women as they navigated that.
Yeah, yeah, it is, it does kind of sometimes feel like a shedding of old skin and
Mhm.
acquiring new skin, but not yet feeling comfortable in it.
Right, right.
Is what the how I would describe the for it's in feels like sometimes an out of body experience, but it is a new normal that you have to create for yourself. But it is depending on how you look at it. It is beautiful. It is
Mhm.
exciting, and it's an opportunity. To one of the essays in that is like pivoting to reinvention.
Mhm.
And so I think it's beautiful when we're able to. It can be so easy um, to look at life from when things that feel imperfect, to look at life from a deficit lens. But I do think it's powerful when we're able to look at it, asset frame it. What are the
Mhm.
assets I have, and how am I going to choose um, to to root myself in all of the affirmations that I know I'm deserving of.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one of the other things that kind of stuck out to me in that portion of the book is because I did read the whole thing, just so you know.
Good.
Yeah, like henceforth all the
Yeah.
tasks. But one of the things that really stuck out to me because I have friends that are kind of struggling through it now. Now their kids are in some cases their kids are grown and they
Yeah.
got grandkids and all of that at this juncture of their lives, but they are still seeking to
Mm.
find themselves after all the years of either being a wife and a mom or just a mom or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And now in their 50s they still are, they in some cases they don't really know who they are. They've forgotten what they like.
Right.
They
Right.
all of those things like that. So I just think it's important, just in talking about that, in at an earlier stage of life, and maybe figuring out ways through community or through having real and open and honest conversations that women don't necessarily have to lose themselves. Yes,
Mhm.
you handle your business and you raise your child and all of that, but not to lose themselves in the midst of it.
Yeah, yeah. I do wish that they, when I remember when I first had my son, I'm like, why didn't anyone tell me about this?
Right.
Why did they leave out all the hard parts? I think that applies to motherhood. I also think that just applies to womanhood,
Yes.
younger, you know, young women, 19, 20, 21, 22. Those very prime ages. There's
Mhm.
so much that we also don't share for
Right.
young women,
Right.
who are at these beginning stages of navigating the world, and um, are very impressionable. The messages they receive, they absorb like a sponge. We absorbed like
Mhm.
sponges.
Mhm.
And we, to the point where, we're so open to the messages and to opportunities that if if given the wrong messages, we'll believe them. you
Mhm.
know we'll enter into the world subscribing to negative narratives of Black women, believing that we're not worthy, believing that we're not capable, believing that we're too this or not enough of this. And the more we internalize those messages, they have an effect on the relationships we develop, how high we or how far we leap and jump in opportunities based on whether we believe we can actually do them. And so I think that, you know, women to women, whether it's at the early stages of motherhood or the early stages of womanhood, it's important for us to like extend that hand and to be very honest, and then, you know, just embrace each other along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are so correct. It's just important, you know, to have those, to be able to have those conversations and,
Mhm.
you know, gain an understanding and, yeah, so that we
Mhm.
can all, you know, be in a position where we all are, you know, living well.
Absolutely. Living well,
Yeah,
yes.
where we are all living well and, you know, able to, you know, live full lives, you know, live
Right,
fully actualized lives, you know, that we don't have to be stuck in one dimension, that we can be, you
exactly.
know, all that we are, you know,
Mhm.
and that it's okay that we be all that we are. And
Yes.
even if people think it's too much, so what?
Yes. It should
That's
be
their
celebrated.
problem.
I
So,
love it.
a couple last questions. You know, we've kind of talked. Obviously, we've been talking about the book. What is the biggest takeaway that you want people to to get from Life? I swear.
Mm. It's such, you know, I think for everyone, it's gonna hit differently. It'll resonate differently. But I think I'd probably bring it back home to the idea of, you know, remembering that it's not a linear path. Um, that, you know, the idea that we have to live by this very straight and rigid progression through life is just not realistic. It's okay to digress. It's okay to ebb and flow. That's how we get closer to learning ourselves better, is by, you know, the dips and the highs and the dips and the highs and the unpredictability. And, you know, it gets us closer to knowing what works for us and what doesn't, and where we thrive and where we're not, where we don't thrive, how we can live better. We can only learn that through, you know, the experimentation and the exploring. And I would love for more women to embrace that, whether that's through healing or whether that's through their creativity or their careers or, you know, their relationships, that there will be letdowns, but that nothing is in vain. And it's actually, you know, just a beautiful journey when you think of it in that way, and when you allow yourself permission to just welcome all of the experiences, the heartbreak, the breakthroughs, the irony, the coincidences, the consequences. That is part of our growth. And, you know, I think a lot of us are just so hard on ourselves when things don't go either as we planned or as society, you know, might lead us to believe is the right
Right.
way to do things. And, you know, I hope from that more women are able to walk away from this book giving themselves more grace.
And that was
And
the word that was on the tip of my tongue.
grace, yes.
Giving ourselves grace,
Yes.
grace, yes, and having
And I think
self
we deserve that.
compassion.
And if we don't
Yes,
give ourselves grace, the world doesn't. And so I
absolutely.
think that needs to come from us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much for that. I know that you are in the midst of a book tour because I'm like
Yeah.
your book baby is only a good 9 days old.
Yeah.
So I know you're going to be doing, you know, on your virtual book tour and things like that. Anything coming up next that
Mm.
folks can be on the lookout for from you, Chloe?
Yes. Well, all of my events are listed on my website, chloelououezo.com. But this weekend, if anyone is in DC, I'm going to have a book event with Bus Boys and Poets.
Okay.
I'll be in conversation with Christine Platt, who is a wonderful DC based author. And then I will be going to Oakland
Okay.
for an in-person event as well. That is on the 19th. LA is on the 21st. Atlanta is on December 1st. And then I'll be back in LA in early December as well.
All right. So you've got, and it's scrolling at the bottom. So
Yes.
you should have all the information. I do that purposely so you all
Good.
can go and tune in and tap in and find out what's going on with Chloe. Are you still actively doing the podcast as well, or?
I'm not in production right now because I needed to pause for this, but yes, we just wrapped up season 4. The finale was amazing. And I'll be looking to do season 5 in early 2022.
Right, yeah, that's how I say. You can't say that 3
Right.
times fast.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think this is a good start to bringing back Live Well, Sister, because we really do want to live well. And a part of that living well is being able to be open and authentic and tell our stories. And we didn't get into it, but you talk about setting our intentions, just all of those different things that are part of getting to a place of living well. So we will be back. I will be back. Maybe Chloe will be able to watch if she's not busy. I'll be back next week. I'm going to go ahead and put this up so you'll see who's coming. 1 second. This is what happens when you are the producer and the host. We will have special guest Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, who is the author of Fierce Love. So she will be here next Thursday at 8 o'clock, and we will be talking to her about her new book that just came out a couple days ago, actually. So we're going to talk to her, and then between there will be another BGC book club event on Monday with Tanana Reeve Dew. We'll be discussing her book, The Between. So I'm going to keep you busy because I'm busy. And we just look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks again for joining us, Chloe. I wish you all of the success in the world with everything that you've got going on, both professionally and personally. And hope to see you again. So you stay here for a second. I'm going to say good night to everyone else. And I hope to see you again real soon. Take care.